farther and farther through the book of Revelation. Kind of a funny story. So we left off at Revelation 12, and last Sunday we went down to Oklahoma City to see Logan's and down at Oklahoma Christian. He's in the band there, and we've not been able to go. Last year we couldn't go to any of their concerts, and they had one in September we couldn't go to. So they had that one. I thought, really should probably go to one of his concerts. We wanted to, and we finally had one that we could make happen. Well, the funny story behind that is we went to services at Edmond Church of Christ down there, and the lesson was starting at chapter 13 of Revelation. I was like, oh, this is good. I'm getting my notes ready for next week. So it worked out really well. So we are up to chapter 13. But for those who have forgotten or haven't been here for all of the first 12, let's do a little review. So some of the big things that we really started talking about, and this is really critical when studying the book of Revelation, just to put it in the proper context and to understand these keys to understanding it that we went through. Probably one of the most important ones to not overlook is all the times that the phrase of some form of it, shortly come to pass, is used. And then we'll look through this and see if we ever get to a point where we get a jump in time. It hasn't happened up through this point in time. Everything has just been kind of a storyline of events that are going on without an enormous period of waiting time for these events to happen. These were shortly to come to pass, which means everything that we've talked about so far are still shortly to come to pass at the time it was written, which means these things have, for the most part, passed by, and we'll see how they play themselves out. So we had 7 seals on a scroll, and I was looking in Isaiah even, I think it was Isaiah 25. There's another passage where it talks about another scroll that was sealed, and nobody was able to open it. No one would be able to read it. And it reminded me of that imagery that he used here of the same thing, of this scroll that was then given. Nobody could open it until finally the Lamb, as we know Jesus, the reference there, was able to actually be the one to open up that scroll. So the first 4 seals were opened up, and they were announcements. They were announcements made using the horses that a lot of times people really fixate on as one of these pictures in their mind of what must be going on in the future, but it's not. It was things that were going to happen in their time. So it was God using conquering forces, using the waging of war, economic hardship, and then also other different hardships inflicted upon the Roman Empire to take them down. The 5th seal was really truly in a lot of ways the most pivotal, that's not even a word, pivotal moment within the book, because it's where you finally get to see who was really asking this of when is this going to happen. And it's these souls that are underneath the altar, and they're crying out, how much longer until our blood is avenged? And he said, it's not done yet, essentially was the message to him, but I will avenge your blood, but there's still more to come. And the 6th seal was very clear that he'll do it. So you have the first 4 saying, this is how I'm going to weaken their empire. The 5th seal says, how long before this finally happens? And the 6th one says, don't worry, it will happen. So it's kind of a reaffirming answer to those souls under the altar. And then we have a period of time before the 7th seal is open, and this is going to come back into play in chapter 13 as well today. Before that 7th seal is open, we see that God is going to protect his people during this. And he wanted to remind them, I will take down the Roman Empire, I won't take down my church. I will not mess with you, or you're going to be safe through this. And he marks out all of them. From, the 12 tribes is all of the tribes. He takes 12 times 1,000 from each tribe for 12,000. That's all of them. And all of them from all of the tribes is 144,000. It's just a symbolic number. We're not really anywhere literal in this book. I don't know where we would ever all of a sudden jump into literal out of this one. It's all written in kind of code words of all of you are going to be protected. 144,000 will be sealed. And so he's saying, I'm not going to hurt you during this whole process. I have a target. It's the beast. It's the Roman Empire. It's not you. And then the 7th seal opens, and there's this deafening silence that goes on for 30 minutes. And then the prayers are lofted up, put into that fiery censer, and thrown back down to the earth as he is answering their prayers by turning it back onto the Romans is what's going to happen. And then the 7 trumpets start. The first 4 of them are the natural forces by which there will be partial destruction, also aimed at this empire. land, sea, rivers, and sky. And we see all of those happening. And then the seventh seal, this is when I did it again. I need to remember that I have that in there twice, because I do a save as and then start from scratch. If you guys know where I'm going with that, keep forgetting to take that one out. It's in there twice. But the fifth trumpet is announced only to the evil then. And it's very clearly, he says, he will protect his people, but he will bring down the empire through their own evil ways. So he's talking directly to them. Through your own evil ways, I will take this down. And these are things we've all covered, so I know it's kind of going through quickly. This is just a recap. The sixth trumpet announces the forces that will come from outside the empire to attack them as well. So he's going to use not only natural forces, their own evil intentions, and then outside actual political forces as well to inflict his judgment on the Roman Empire, which historically is how they go down. It was a mix between being weakened through successive big natural disasters that started to weaken the empire. There was all this internal fighting and conflict within there. A lot of that really kicks in. You get to the point of Nero where he kills himself, because things aren't going his way things get really bad within that empire. And then other forces will come in and further weaken them, and he'll take them down in that way. And then the seventh trumpet is basically an announcement that it's about to happen. Now, this is back into that shortly come to pass idea. We do get a little glimpse into the throne room of heaven during this, where everyone's worshiping God and they're excited about the idea that the judgment on the Roman Empire is about to happen. So we're starting to see the momentum kicking in that these actions are about to take place. And then we got into chapter 12, and where we left off this last couple weeks ago, where the main characters in this part of the Revelation, as we start to get into kind of the, if you want to think of it as the act of it, if you want to think of it as a kind of a not a literal, but a symbolic play, where he's explaining all of what's going to happen, how he's going to do it. But remember, trying to sneak this past the Romans, they don't want them to catch on of what's going to happen here and further take it out on the Christians. And so what he does is he uses all this symbology, and he references the child, which was clearly Christ, the dragon, who is clearly Satan, and then the woman, which we were a little bit less certain on, but it appears to be the idea of God's eternal plan of how he's going to carry this out when we're looking at those things. And so when you looked at it, Satan attacks in 4 different ways. First, he tries to go against Christ on earth because he goes against the child. So he goes against Christ in heaven as well, and that doesn't work for him as well. So he goes against the plan of God and tries to derail what God's plan was going to be to keep it from being proclaimed. And after he fails in all of those different attempts, he then turns to the individual Christians and tries to seek to persecute them, because he talks about those who follow the woman's children, is how he refers to those who follow the plan. And so he goes after everyone, and that's kind of, God's explaining to us, here's what's going on. The part of the battle you can't see is that this dragon has been after you guys the whole time. He's been after trying to stop this from ever happening. Now he's taking it out on you directly. I will win this one. We're back into that message there. All right, so in Revelation chapter 13, the dragon, actually I was going to have Josh read the first verse. So before I caught myself this time. I'm ready for you, Josh, if you're ready. All right, thank you, Josh. So again, this beast that comes out of the sea is the first kind of player in this on the chapter 13 kind of part of this narrative, if you want to call it that. So the dragon's standing on the shore of the sea, and he calls up a beast. So you can see this is going to be some sort of evil force, obviously. And it comes out, it has 10 horns and 7 heads. And these are references to whether the 10 horns, which are the 10 leaders, whether they're the emperors, which it probably is, of the Roman Empire, the 7 heads, there's the 7 hills of Rome. There's all these different things that you could come up with of where that might be in a reference to, but in some way they knew the reference to exactly what that was, with its 10 crowns on its horns. and each head had a blasphemous name. And so they're all going against God on this one. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. And he's trying to say, you remember all those other ones from back in Daniel? You remember all those ones that it looks a lot like those other things, this beast? It reminds me a whole lot of the lion. It reminds me of the bear. It kind of reminds me of a leopard. It's like trying to trigger their memory there to make sure they know exactly who's being talked about here. That this is an empire that's very much like those other empires that were described in that book of Daniel. And so he goes on to explain to them, okay, we're talking about the other empire. So the dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and his great authority. So the authority that has been really exerted upon the earth, Satan is giving the Roman Empire this opportunity to really exercise their strength and their power, is what we see happening here. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? All right, so clearly there is worship of the Roman emperors taking place here. And we see that. We know that happened. We know that was a common practice, but it was carrying over into satanic worship of them as well. And so there is this giving honor and glory to Satan through the Roman Empire. All of these things which are going to be adamantly opposed to what God wants his people to be a part of. And that's going to be really important to understand that distinction that is being made, that the worshiping and overindulgence of their egos to the emperors is a form of worshiping the dragon who gave them their power. And that's not to be missed by them. And for them to really understand, this isn't just a force that, I can be a good citizen of Rome. No, this is you've got somebody terrible over you that is adamantly opposed to God and is an instrument of Satan who is doing everything possible to try to stamp out the church. And I'm not going to let that happen, but you need to understand, you can't try to walk this fence here. You have to choose a side, and that's going to come up here in just a minute on there. But the other one is the beast had a head that had a fatal wound. I mentioned Nero. There are some people who will say that because Nero, he committed suicide by stabbing himself in the throat, which I don't understand. Of all the ways you could die, that does not seem like, I don't understand why that was the way he chose to die in any way, shape, or form. That seems so horrific, but that's how he chose to kill himself. Because, first of all, he was mentally incompetent to be emperor, and that was becoming apparent to a lot of them. He used to take the Christians, and some reports say that he would light his garden by burning people alive. I mean, this is the kind of insanity that this guy had, that was an okay practice to do. And it became even obvious to the Romans that he wasn't even fit to lead. And so here's that internal strife that was going on. They were trying to dethrone him. There were a lot of people, though, that liked Nero. And so when he died, there was some belief that maybe he didn't really die and that he had come back to life in another form and all this stuff. So that might have been a play at them. I don't think that it's saying that that's what happened. I think he's kind of using that they all knew, that they all believed Nero's come back, kind of this thought. So, they had a fatal wound that was healed kind of a thing. And you get the idea, everything just keeps pointing back to the beast being the Roman Empire. So, again, whoever this head is that has the fatal wound, we don't have certainty on it. And I wouldn't want to stand here and say that we do on this one. But what we do see is that Satan is going to use this to his advantage. He's going to use this beast on that. The biggest message here is that there was worshiping of both Rome and Satan going on, or the Roman leaders and Satan both going on. And that's the first beast, making the first beast then the actual empire, the Roman Empire. All right, so the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. That is that time, times, and half a time. That is the period of time of intense persecution that the church was going to undergo. Many people believe it could be everywhere from 90 AD to as late as 300 AD, that was the period of time that all of this was going to take place in. That would be 210 years in reality. And in the scope of things, that is a short period of time, but it isn't short to the people who are enduring it. And he reminds them it's not done yet. And he keeps reminding them. But for this 42 months, this seemingly long period of time, but not really long in the big picture of it, that's all we really get out of that. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and all who live in heaven. And so now you have the Roman Empire turning itself against God more directly during this time period. And we see that happening. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation, which essentially it ruled the world. This empire, this beast, took over everything. It took over the entirety of the world and was given whatever it needed to do in the sense of what authority. Satan wasn't using other forces to stop him. He was letting them have free reign on his domain, which is this world, and he was letting them try to stamp out the church. I think sometimes we forget that aspect of things when we read these, is that this, in the sense of what the room we're in and the group of people we're a part of, this of God's kingdom is his. This is God's creation, but the prince of this world is unfortunately Satan. And so he still has dominion here in the sense of God has not exercised that final judgment of ridding him entirely and locking him away, which comes later in the book. But during this period of time, we still have to deal with the fact that Satan is still actively involved in the goings-on of things here, and he's actively working against God's people. He is still doing that. He was clearly doing that during this time period. And so the idea here is he is going after God's people directly, and he is giving authority to the Roman Empire to do whatever they need to try to stamp out the church. And so we see this happening. But it says, all inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. I think we know who we're talking about, right? It's pretty obvious. Again, this is, who would be these people? Who are the exclusion to this? Everybody in the world worships this beast except for who? The Christians, the real Christians, right? Those who have their names written on the book of life. And so we can see now we have a distinction between this. That's also going to be important here in just a second. All right, so whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity, they will go. Do you see here, it's not done yet. There is still more. If they're going to take you over, they're going to take you over. If anyone is to be killed with the sword, they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. So it's interesting that he stops this in this kind of storyline, and he's like, by the way, if they're going to kill you, they're going to kill you. And if you're going to be taken captive by them, that's going to happen. I'm not saying that part's not still going to happen. We're not to the exercising of the ridding of the beast yet. So until that happens, during that 42 months, that period of intense persecution, it's going to get worse for some of you. Hang in there with patient endurance, just like those souls under the the martyred souls under the altar did. They didn't win on earth, but they won. And that's what he wants them to see. They won this crown of life. So things were going to happen, and they needed to accept it. And that's a tough pill to swallow, right? I mean, put yourself into that position. And this letter of encouragement, which is a letter of encouragement, because to die for a pointless cause. Give you an example. I don't know, have any of you ever seen either the musical or the movie musical of Les Mis? That one. Okay. If you're familiar with that one, Les Miserables or whatever, if you want to say the full name of it. But that one, it's basically about all these people who, many of them gave their life during the French Revolution, which failed. And so you sit there and you think, like, it was really for nothing in one sense. Like that's got to be a really despairing reality, to realize that people around you were giving their lives and it still didn't work. And it was still a complete failure as an attempt to overthrow that government or whatever. He wants them to hold their head a little higher. Not a single person who was martyred during this time was for nothing at all. It is for something. It is going somewhere. He is still going to win. This isn't a lost cause. Because that's really probably where a lot of people were starting to think of, I think we're just going to all die over this, and nothing's going to come of this, and this is all for nothing. And that's what this book is written to them to say, no. God's going to win on this one. He is going to be the victor, not necessarily right now, and it's not going to look like it right now, but trust him. And we get the benefit of looking on this side of it. This is why I've always been somewhat mind-boggled that Revelation is a book that people get spooked by and won't read, because it is such an encouraging realization of how powerful God is, that his words came true. He said, hang in there, I'll take down that beast. And you know what? He took down that beast. And so that's what's really great about this, to see that he did this. So again, there's a really big distinction as well between the people of the world and the people whose names are in the book of life. So then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. So it seemed a little nice, had some aspects of positive, but ultimately it had more Satan side to it as well. And so don't miss the lamb and dragon reference there. It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, kind of you could have said it that way too on there. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. And so this is some form of worship, this temple-like worship that's going on, which was actually becoming incredibly common during these days in the Roman Empire. These people would be essentially, these altars and these temples were being set up, and people had to participate in it. It was a forced emperor worship. And it was a cult that was growing in not only the total number, but also it was a cult that was growing in the power that it could exercise on the people around. So you have this where, again, this is now this second beast, which is forcing the worship of the first beast. So you have this cult of Roman emperor worship forcing this worship on of the beast. And so now, if you lived in the Roman Empire, it was expected of you that you worship the beast. Well, the beast was given its power by the dragon, Satan, and that's where, again, you essentially get into satanic practices over this. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. Now, there wasn't an actual image that came to life and started to speak. Again, we didn't all of a sudden switch to literal. We're still in this symbolic understanding. He's saying they set up this whole practice of worship, and this other beast, which was this whole, it became its own, we say that phrase still, it's like it took on a beast of its own, It became this beast of emperor worship that breathed life into this whole idea of it, and everything about it. It was this ball got rolling, and it couldn't get stopped. And it was going to trample over all of the Christians in the way, because you were essentially made to do this within the Roman Empire. There have been many people who have stated, and I can't prove, I don't know all of their sources, so I'll say what they said as I can't prove this, that I've done the full amount of research in this area to find what they found. But there were at least many locations within, and very likely in Asia Minor, where this was largely directed to, where they were experiencing the worst of the persecution, that if they didn't go to that temple of emperor worship, and if they didn't receive either some form of documentation or some sort of, ash put on them or something of that thing from that temple worship they did, they couldn't then go into the market and make purchases and things like that. It was basically, you either do this or you don't get to play in this town at all. Like, you'll never have a job in this town again if you don't. That was the kind of mentality they were being forced into. And that is what that second beast was doing. So we get to this, and it said it also forced all people, great or small, rich or poor, free or slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. This number is 666. Oh, Oh, that number. Oh, how many times? First of all, how many of you have had an instance, for those of you who are Topeka residents, have had an incident where you have to give your zip code, and all of a sudden the person on the other line is like, oh, it's just the first sixes of the zip code. For those of you who aren't aware, Topeka zip codes start with 666. So there's always that issue. And so, the first time people hear that, they're like, how can you live there? I think there's a little misreading on this one. So many theories, so little time. Where do we start on this one? This is an interesting one because some numerologists have said if you were to, and this is maybe where the wisdom came in, they've come up with a way, and I'm not going to say it's the right way, but they've come up with a way that you can take the the Hebrew letters, I believe it's Hebrew letters, of the name Nero, add up the numbers of those, if A is 1 and B is 2, that kind of idea that you attach numbers to the letters. If you were to add them up, you'd get 666 out of the name Nero. Other people said it's kind of the way that they would have numbered people in that sense, and that would be the number value to a person, the way we kind of use social security numbers or whatever. That was kind of code for them. I think what we do see, though, on this is when we look at this is, first of all, this mark of the beast was participatory. Not some random thing. It was participation in worship of something. I've heard more people afraid of things that they think are the mark of the beast. You don't have to go very far back in time, and the fact that we've all become accustomed to debit cards has now, that was a sticking point a generation ago. It was a really difficult one. And the fact that we added chips to those debit cards, well, this is really going that way. And the thought that maybe your phone with your own, all that stuff that could have all of your information stored in it could possibly be it. How many of us heard within the last year that people actually thought that the COVID vaccine was the mark of the beast? People have gone mad over this. The beast is the Roman Empire. When people wonder, what is the mark of the beast? It was something that prevented them from doing business within the Roman Empire because they wouldn't worship the Roman Empire. We have not yet jumped ahead in time. He uses this idea of this mark, of this, you are known as participating in it, in the same way that he used the same wording a little bit ago when he took on the same mark of the 144,000 who had a seal on them. That was a choice that they made to follow God. A little bit later, he made that distinction. They're all going to worship except for the ones who have their names written in the book of life. And he makes that distinction. And now he says they're going to have this mark of the beast put on them that he is going to know who they are. Remember, how is he going to know who his enemies are? They're going to mark themselves as being part of it. They're going to attach themselves with this participatory part of that worship of the beast. It is not some mystical thing that's going to sneak past all of us and whoops, I signed up for the wrong credit card and look, now I'm sentenced to hell. That is not the kind of, it doesn't make sense with any of the rest of Scripture that would be possibly the kind of thought here. That is not what this was about. This is not some watch your back. I gotta tell you too, I think one of the things that's so I would say probably discouraging when you see it is how many people let their wheels spin and spin and spin. And the only way you kind of get an insight to it are, let's say there's somebody who wants to put all this stuff out on social media, which I think I've said before, I don't love the idea of throwing too much out to let the Word of God get trampled all over. That may not be our best location for throwing things out there when you're just going to get Jesus' name just thrashed and throttled and knowingly. So some of these people throw these things out there, and particular ones, all their mind, you can see all they're focused on is what is this mark of the beast? What are these signs of the end times? All these things. That is not, when I read the rest of the New Testament, I don't see any mention of you need to be focused every bit of your life, wondering and worrying about whether or not this is a sign that it's about to happen. Because ultimately, what we talked about in the sermon this morning is what we should be focusing on. Are we doing what we need to be doing? Not are we cracking the code and figuring out this thing? Because first of all, you have to misinterpret Revelation to even create that code that you're trying to crack. And so it's this exercise in futility of trying to figure these things out when the beast was the Roman Empire. And he makes it as clear as could be. These things are about to happen. So what is the mark of the beast? It has something to do with the Roman Empire, which, newsflash to all of us, is kind of at the point of irrelevant to us now. It was really important then for them to understand that God knew who were the worshipers of that and who were his people. He sealed his people, all of them. He was going to protect them. And the beast has marked up all of his people. It's pretty obvious who's who. That's all this was about. It wasn't more than that. It was just that. And that they knew that there was a point in time where you had to make a choice. Living in the Roman Empire, the choice came at an enormous cost. You had to make a choice. Am I going to be a part of the Roman Empire fully and worship it the way all of them do and put that mark on me that I'm one of them? Or am I going to let God seal me as one of his? And come what may with all of that. Because he told them, it's going to get bad. They may kill you. They may capture you. These are all connected thoughts here. It's not some distinct, one separate, conversation there. All right, so the last thing there, I said that number 666. The other thing within the numbering, 6 is the number of incomplete. So this is lacking. If you want to look at it that way, not 666. It's, imperfect, lacking, falling short. Sounds like he's trying to describe exactly what we know he's trying to describe, which is Satan and his forces. Whoever that might be specifically, that we may not be able to link that up exactly, it's someone who's falling short of perfection or something, or Satan himself. That this is that number that was going to be referenced there, that is the number of the beast. The number of the beast is imperfect. But we know who the beast is. So whether or not the number is that number of a man that he's talking about how Nero is just the exercising form of that, maybe, or whether it's just the interpretation of the number itself. And again, I come back to that part doesn't matter. And sometimes it's okay to get to that part in Revelation and be like, okay, that part, we may not be able to crack that part of the code. We're 2,000 years off from this inside conversation, and we're trying to look back at it. And there's parts that we may not get exactly down to. Don't forget a couple other passages while we look at this. One of them, Ephesians chapter 1. And you also were included in Christ when you heard the message of truth, the gospel of your salvation. When you believed, you were marked in him with a seal, the promised Holy Spirit, who is a deposit guaranteeing our inheritance until the redemption of those who are God's possession, to the praise of his glory. Let's see, Ephesians. Seems like they're one of the recipients of this letter of Revelation. They're one of those 7 churches of Asia, and he's already told them about being marked and sealed by God. And so he's going to use that same form of language to remind them that there's another way you could be marked and sealed. Don't do it. That's all he was really getting at there. He says it again in the 4th chapter. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it might benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. And so again, he's used that language with them. My understanding would be they would probably held on to that letter, and for the years and years, the decades that have gone by up until the point of the book of Revelation being received by them, and this letter of encouragement to them, things had gotten really bad, but they probably kept telling us, God has sealed us. I mean, you can imagine that's an encouragement they probably used on a regular basis. After Paul had told them that, don't forget, when we believed, God sealed us for redemption. We are sealed people. And so when he says, we've got the mark of the Holy Spirit on us, and then he turns around and says, don't let yourself get the mark of the beast. They understood that. It wasn't a weird, strange concept to those people who had been hearing this before. This is actually not even a strange concept to God's followers at all. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads, to the point where they took that literally, and there's still Orthodox Jews that will still wear the phylactery on the forehead, and they'll still have those tied-on messages on their arms as well. They knew this idea of marking yourself with who your leader was. That was not a strange concept for them. Unfortunately, we try to make it that way. In verse 1 of chapter 14, he says, "Then I looked, and before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and had his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps." And he's giving a contrast between the worship that's going on in the Roman Empire and what it looks like to really be marked by the right side of things. And he's using that as a contrast there. "And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who'd been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins." Now understand, this is not a reference to that in the sense of more than what was happening in that cult of emperor worship was often prostitution. And defiling themselves with women was participating in that. And that's what he's getting at. They knew that, because he's not saying this was literally only the men who had never been married. He is saying these are all of God's people, those who never participated with that woman who's going to show up later, the prostitute, all this idea that it's the symbolic language that keeps being used. The reference of the woman who's going to be referenced in the prostitute, that city of Rome, that's going to come in later. The idea of the emperor worship involved this. They knew what he was referencing there. That this is 144,000, all of God's people marked who did not participate in this adulterous worship of the Roman Empire. He says, "They will follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless." Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." And a second angel followed him and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." Well, okay, that should also be pointed out too from the book of Daniel, that when the reference is made to Babylon, that is kind of a sneaky way to call Rome by what they, if you want to talk about them without talking about them, you call them Babylon, because it's the same empire, same central land group, and it was the same part of that same statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamt about. This is Babylon all over again. I mean, fallen is Babylon, fallen is Babylon. It's talking about the destruction of Rome, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast in its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury." In other words, you pick which side you're going to be on. Do you see this as not a, whoops, I accidentally got some mark on me kind of a thing, and now I'm going to die. It is, I willingly chose to worship this beast instead of worshiping God. That was what was at play here. And so they had decided that. They had willingly participated in emperor worship, and they are going to then drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured out full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. This is an announcement of their judgment that will be pronounced on them for participating in this worship of the beast. And the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. And again, you see the eternal aspect of what's being discussed there. There will be no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast in its image, and for anyone who receives the mark of its name, which is actively participation on there. This calls for patient endurance on the part of God's people who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus. And there we see during that period of time, the encouragement was for them, hang in there. It's going to get bad. It's going to get worse. And you've got to really, truly hold on through all of this. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Okay, that gives a little bit of a clue. And this, what do you see there, just from that verse right there? Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. This wasn't the end of the times. This wasn't the end of the world. Blessed are those who continue to die in the Lord from now on. There is still more earthly future ahead of what we're talking about right now. This is not him exercising the end time judgment. He never was getting at that. They never thought it. That was a thought process that kicked in a long time later when people wanted to visit this and in our selfishness make it all about us. I mean, again, how in the world would it have ever made any sense that God would have spread this around to the 7 churches of Asia Minor to make sure that we knew which president was you think about it, and sometimes you're thinking, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way that you can honestly think that this entire book, of all the things that had happened in the world, he skipped over what was happening to them and decided, instead of talking about what's happening to you and the persecution and the martyring that's happening right now, I'm going to talk about the weird election issues that are going to happen 2,000 years ago on the other side of or 2,000 years from now on the other side of the world. That makes complete sense, and it just doesn't fit in. And as much as people want it to, this was a book written to those people about their leadership, their political leadership, and what they were enduring to encourage them that they should keep on keeping on. Don't let yourself get the mark of the beast, which isn't something weird. It's not a microchip. It's not anything like that. It is specifically a part of worshiping God. A part of worshiping the beast instead of worshiping God. You also get marked with a seal, and you get the mark of God when you truly worship him. And you're marked with the Holy Spirit for the day of redemption. They're going to be marked with the beast for the day of punishment. And so you can see the contrast that he was laying out there. Don't try to read into that more than what we have. I'm not going to get through chapter 14, and that's okay. I have more slides we're not going to do today because I don't want to keep pushing any farther. I do want to see, anybody have any questions or thoughts on this? The mark of the beast is one of those that if you can really understand what it's talking about, all of a sudden, a lot of these other conversations you hear about it suddenly become, you're missing it's one of those, it's a frustration of you're missing the point of what is a really beautiful story about how God loved, cared for those people in the early church, and when the time was just right, he wiped out the people who were going to try to stop his church from growing and flourishing. And if you really look at it from that aspect and you can see what he was really getting at, all of a sudden the book of Revelation isn't some worrisome book about all these events that, first of all, are only going to happen to the people who are not on his side anyway, so really doesn't matter to us. Even if that other group of people are right on their interpretation, which I don't think they are, but even if they were, it's still, the bad things only happen to the bad people. So just don't let yourself be that, and all this book becomes not your problem. But I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's about a specific storyline of how God redeemed his people from a really tragic situation they were enduring on earth. And when you see that, there's a lot of encouragement out of this book. All right, we will end there. Have a good day.